On live right now, and hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Typical Skeptic Podcast. I get to have one of my favorite UFO researchers on tonight, and that's Preston Dennett. He's here to talk about his newest book, Not From Here, Volume 5. Preston Dennett is a lifelong UFO researcher, author, and field investigator who's been studying UFO sightings, alien encounters, and contact cases for over 3-4 decades. He's interviewed thousands of eyewitnesses and experiencers, documenting some of the most compelling and credible cases of extraterrestrial contact from around the world. So if you're looking for disclosure, look no further than here. Preston is the author of over 30 books on UFOs and the paranormal and is widely respected for his calm, evidence-based approach to deep compassion for experiencers. His work bridges the gap between nuts and bolts UFO research and the deeply personal nature of contact phenomena. Tonight, Preston joins the Typical Skeptic Podcast to discuss his newest book, Not From Here, Volume 5, a powerful continuation of his ongoing series documenting real alien encounter cases, including physical sightings, onboard experiences, missing time, and long-term contact. In the episode, we'll explore real-world alien encounter cases from everyday people, physical UFO sightings and close encounters, onboard experiences, missing time, and lifelong contact, common patterns across experiencer reports, why these encounters are happening now, and the emotional, psychological, and spiritual impact of the contact. And with all that said, I'd like to give him a big warm welcome back to the show. Preston, thanks so much for coming back on, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. Yeah, thanks for having me back on, Robert. It's always fun speaking with you. So this should be fun.
Yeah. So take us into Not From Here, Volume 5. Like, what separates this from the other series, or have you just been kind of compiling cases, like of real contact, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, this whole series of books started out because I wanted to start. I found all these articles I'd written over the years for various magazines, like Fate Magazine and UFO Universe and MUFON Journal and a bunch of them. And I realized, most of the stuff is not in my books. And it's really hard to find these magazines. Some are, 10, 20, 30 years old. Most are out of print or, the magazine's no longer active. I thought, what? This might make a good idea for just a book, a collection of these UFO articles. So that's how it started. And I started looking at these articles because I really like finding patterns in UFO research, sort of unexplained or unexplored, rather, avenues where a lot of people haven't really looked into them or were afraid to, perhaps, or didn't notice them, because some are a little controversial or off the beaten path. So that's what the first 4 volumes were. And I covered such topics as UFOs over graveyards. That was an interesting one. That's definitely a thing. But UFOs over prisons, phone calls from ETs. Yes, that does happen. UFOs over mines. That was another one that was really interesting to explore. So all these different avenues, the UFO Bigfoot connection, the alien clown connection. That was another weird sort of pattern that I found. And so these books kind of became that sort of theme, looking into the darker corners of ufology. I did a whole a chapter rather, on alien anal probes. Which, was actually really interesting and not nearly as common as I thought. Everyone's always talking about them, and I could only find a handful of cases that were truly credible. But it was something I thought, needed to be treated seriously. I did have a little fun with it. I couldn't help it. And this latest volume is a little different because, honestly, I thought Volume 4 was going to be it. I'd pretty much gotten through all my articles at that point. All the others were somewhat in the books I've already published. But there were a couple that I hadn't gotten out there. And I started writing more articles because every now and then, I do still write articles for magazines. They don't really pay anymore. Everything's digital and everyone wants their articles for free. So it's not as easy for me to do that. But I realized I had about, 5 of them. So what makes this book a little different from the others is most of it is brand new information. I put in 5 or 6 chapters which have never been published before, whereas the others were published in magazines. So otherwise, it's sort of the same theme, exploring different topics that most people probably haven't heard before or haven't gotten a lot of attention. Like in one of the previous volumes, another chapter I did was on the smell of UFOs. You don't hear a lot about that, but it was really interesting. I found about 40 cases or so where people reported smelling something. So that's what the whole theme of these books are about.
I love it. I love it. And I guess the book's called Selected. I'm just looking it up now. Selected UFO articles, and I love it. Like, so take us into a little bit, like, because I know you're a master at like telling stories about the contact cases that you uncover. You've always been really good at that, of conveying the cases and bringing them to life. And can you tell us a couple good cases that really stuck out to you, or that really, because what I want to do, Preston, honestly, like, is I feel like we need to still prove. I mean, I know we need to prove it to me and you, but to the layman's people out there, I feel like we still need to prove that this contact phenomena was happening and that it was a major part of history. It doesn't seem to be happening much anymore. But I mean, and maybe we could also touch on that as well. But I feel like it was a major part of our history, and proving that UFOs are real and that they're absolutely real and they're tangible. And if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. It amazes me that people are still skeptical out there. And I kind of get it, because I came into this field as a skeptic. So I know what it's like to be skeptical. But I think really anyone who takes an objective look, and really even a 5-minute look at the evidence out there, can only come away convinced. It may be against your belief system or contradict what you think you already know about this subject. I always thought the stars were too far away. UFOs couldn't get here. That was a complete speculation, a misconception. And of course, I found out UFOs were real. It took me a year or so after I heard my brother had a sighting, found out a number of people I knew had sightings, really close encounters, missing time, face-to-face encounters with the ETs. Started picking up books and realized pretty quickly that there's an enormous amount of evidence. I don't think skeptics are aware of how much evidence there is. Certainly not just eyewitness testimony, which in and of itself is certainly enough to put someone in prison for the rest of their lives. So it is evidence. Eyewitness testimony is considered evidence, certainly in a court of law. But there's also, of course, films and photographs. And the evidence for that is mountainous. It's today very hard to sift through all the hoaxes and the Photoshop and the AI. But there's some really good photographic evidence out there. I would point to the Rex Heflin photos in Santa Ana, in California, the Trinidad Island photographs, the photographs taken over Mexico City in July of 1991 during a solar eclipse, when a UFO showed up, broad daylight, and 30-some people in separate sections of the city videotaped it. You can find this footage online if you dig deep. It's hard to find, but it's absolutely irrefutable photographic evidence. I love the Comburgaz turkey footage, the Tim Edwards footage from Salida, Colorado. That was mid-1990s, thereabouts, 94, I think. So the photographic evidence is outstanding. Of course, there's radar return cases where these objects are caught on radar, and landing traces, hundreds of them. There's implant removal cases. There's physiological evidence, both injuries and healings. As you know, I've documented some 300 plus healing cases. So the evidence is there. Even angel hair. A lot of people don't know about that. It's a cotton candy kind of spider web-like substance that usually dissolves very quickly. But sometimes there's been enough of it collected that's been put into a laboratory and studied and shown to be very unusual. certainly not naturally occurring. So the evidence is absolutely out there for those who have the courage to look at it without immediately rejecting it. So yeah, I have sympathy for skeptics because I know how difficult it is to sort of have to shift your whole belief system.
This is amazing. I'm looking at the book overview now, and some of these topics are amazing. What about UFOs in the American sitcom?
Yeah, we all know that UFOs have affected our culture profoundly. It's the most popular subject, ETs, aliens, in the film franchises, and certainly in science fiction. It's the number one trope in science fiction. But it's everywhere. We see it on our clothes, images of ETs. We see it in advertising. We see it in video games. And it's all over TV. And, I love sitcoms. I love comedy. I'm a huge fan of a lot of sitcoms. And every now and then I've noticed that they would approach this subject. And it was really, really interesting to see how it was treated. I Love Lucy covered it, My Three Sons, The Dick Van Dyke Show, The Flintstones, Green Acres, Beverly Hillbillies, you name it, Brady Bunch, Golden Girls, Married with Children. Most major sitcoms have covered this subject at one point. I started to see a really interesting but disturbing pattern. In almost every sitcom where they tackled this subject, the person who saw the UFO was the least reliable. It was either the very oldest person, like Betty White, not considered the sharpest tack in the book on the Golden Girls, or like the Brady Bunch. It was Bobby and Cindy who saw the UFO. So every single time, it was the least reliable character in the sitcom that saw the UFO. And in many of these early ones, it ended up being perhaps a secret military test, such as I Dream of Jeannie or Bewitched. I think it did it that way. But towards the end of most of these shows, they leave it open and they give a positive message saying that, yes, UFOs are real. So it's interesting how it's covered. It's a little bit disturbing. I'd like to see someone actually do it right, because it's not true that stupid people are the ones who are seeing UFOs, or naive or ignorant or anything like this. In fact, there was a study done that showed the more intelligent you are, the more likely you are to believe UFOs are real. So it was an interesting study I did, which had never been done before. And it was amazing to find like 25 sitcoms. South Park, I love them because of the way they treat the subject. I'm not really a fan of the show, but they actually stick an ET in pretty much every episode, somewhere in the background, wondering if those guys are a contactee or something, because they take this subject seriously and put it in every episode.
Wow, that's amazing! I didn't realize it was done that much in common sitcoms, especially some of those older shows. That's amazing. And then the twin connection. It says there appears to be a large number of twins among the contactee population. Is that common?
I wondered about it, and I would like more research to be done on this, because I have some questions about it. I haven't been able to firmly establish, that within the contactee population, there is a larger number of twins, but it certainly looks like it. I've interviewed a number of people who've had contact, and it's surprising to see how many of them are twins. There was one case, I think it was the first one I investigated, that this came up. A lady was pregnant with twins, and one disappeared. It was not there. The doctors assumed that she must have passed it or something, or that it died, or they didn't know. But they said the chances of her carrying the surviving twin to full term were 1 in 6 million. This is what they told her. This is when she started having onboard UFO encounters. The ET seemed very interested in her. And she, of course, did carry the twin to full term. I got to meet the twin. He's very precocious. a really adorable little boy. And when he was about 2 or 3 years old, he started talking about having a twin, and actually called him by name. His mother had never given the name of the twin to him. And he kept saying, "I'm seeing angels, Mom, I'm seeing angels." And finally he said, "I'm seeing angels." He's got some really interesting psychic abilities as well. So that was the first one. Then I interviewed a guy who was a fraternal twin, and he's like, "You should interview my brother. He's also having encounters." I'm like, wow, this is interesting. Dolly Safran, you may know, I wrote a whole book about her case, Symmetry, a True UFO Adventure. I asked her about this, and she's like, "Well, yeah, actually, I am a twin." She's always known she was a twin in terms of intuitively, but it wasn't until she was a young adult that her mom told her that her mother was actually pregnant with twins when she was pregnant with Dolly, but one disappeared. She's got this medically verified. And later, as an adult, I'm going to be writing about this in Symmetry too. So you're getting a little bit of a scoop here. Dolly was able to meet her full-grown twin who is living among the ETs. Not unusual. And if you go through the literature on this, you will see a number of cases where people are taken on board and meet their twins. It's funny because some will say, "I saw my own clone." I'm like, I don't think it's a clone. I think this is probably your twin. This is a thing. So if you look at the Allagash case in Maine by Raymond Fowler, Chuck and, let me see, what are their names? I forget. Jim and John Wiener. They're twins, Jim and Jack. Identical twins. And the ETs, when they brought them on board, seemed to show a special interest in them. Of course, there's the Kinsella twins in England, both contactees. There's a number of them. Gosh, let me think. I know I can. Audrey and Debbie Hewins, that's right, in Maine. And I found a number of them. Erlene Carr and Shirlene Wallace, they're twins. So yeah, I think there might be some weird connection going on here. And another thing that really interested me is when people are taken on board and they look at the ETs, whether it's grays or what have you, human looking, they often will say something like, they looked identical. They could have been twins. They were so identical. So I wonder if there's something to this in terms of, the genetics, because ETs we know show a very strong interest in genetics. I don't know. It's a curious connection. I explored it a little bit. It's funny because I interviewed one lady, wrote her story up in one of my books. I think it was Humanoids in High Strangeness. She called me up one day. She's like, "I forgot to tell you, I'm a twin too." I'm like, "Oh, I didn't even think to ask." Now I always ask people, "Would you happen to be a twin?" And some will tell me, "Oh yeah, my mother was pregnant with twins and lost one." So yeah, I think there's something going on here. I do.
Well, do you think there's something? Do you think like twins might be more psychically inept or more higher IQ or something like that? That the aliens want something to do with them?
I hadn't even thought of that because there is of course a very well-known connection between twins, and if you look into that, it's amazing because they sometimes develop their own secret language. Almost every identical twin in particular has stories of how they were able to know what each other's thinking. But now that you mention it, there's been some studies on identical twins separated at birth and how their behavior is to some extent governed by their genetics. There was a gentleman who was separated from his twin, and they both married late. They were both soccer coaches. They both used all the same brands of toothpaste and aftershave. They both hated mustard, I think it was. They both named their dog Toy. Their wife's name was the same. All these absolutely mind-boggling similarities between them that makes you wonder just how much of our behavior is governed by our genetics. So maybe that's a really good point. Yeah, maybe that's something going on here. It's so interesting, whatever it is. But
one of my favorite things that I covered with you, and I don't mean to go off the beaten path here, but like it kind of ties in because you talked about UFOs in graveyards, but what about the UFOs at the drive-in? That was one of my favorite things to talk to you about because, the drive-in holds such a nostalgic part of like American history. You know what I mean? It was just a great part of our history, something that we did here, and like, it would be so cool to think that a UFO would show up. And you said a lot of times they would show up and they would make spectacles, right? Like they would show off for the people.
100%. Yeah, that was actually going to be a chapter in one of these books. So is UFOs over schoolyards. But I found 100 cases. So, of course, I couldn't make a chapter out of that. And what an amazing thing to discover because, I've read all the books I can find on UFOs. And the only case I could find in any book was by Ryan Sprague. His book, Somewhere in the Skies, a really good book. Oh, shoot. I'm sorry. Hold on a second. Let me turn this off. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I meant to turn that off. Yeah, Ryan Sprague, in his book, Somewhere in the Skies, an excellent book. I'd recommend it. Talked about a case from Scott Santa, which was really cool. I ended up calling Scott and doing an interview with him because he saw this. He was at the drive-in theater with a friend when this massive kind of boomerang-shaped UFO came right over the theater. And this is how they always do it. This is not way high up there. Because I discarded any case where, a UFO flew by. Because you're outside. It's late at night. You're out there for hours. You're much more likely to see a UFO. Every single one of these cases involves theaters that are targeted. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that the UFO came right over the screen or right next to it. And in Scott Santa's case, this was on the East Coast, Northeast, came right over the theater and it knocked it out. The theater went black. The snack stand went black. All the cars were knocked out. And it came right over. You could hear it thrumming. He says his ears popped. He walked out of the car. Everyone was looking up at it. Slowly moved over. And as soon as it left the whole parking lot of the theater, the movie went zoom back on. All the cars kept driving in. The snack stand went back on. All the lights on the outside. And here's the weird part. Nobody remembered it, not even Scott himself. Everyone just started watching the movie again as if nothing had happened. And it wasn't until a year later that he walked into a bookstore and saw Ed Ruppelt's book, UFOs, saw the word UFOs, and remembered. I see this with a lot of missing time cases. Someone will have a cue or a trigger. We'll perhaps see the cover of Communion. That woke up a lot of people to their contacts. So that was a really interesting case and kind of unusual, but I've got a couple of other cases like that. One I investigated personally involving a lady named Claudia, who I worked with, and she found out I was a UFO researcher and was like, oh, I've got a story for you. She was at the Paramount Drive-In in California in 1971, 72, big theater. And this UFO showed up, parked right to the right of the screen, and was making this whooshing noise. Everyone panicked. They were dropping their popcorn and drinks, screeching out. In those days, you had little speakers you attached to the side of the window. And some people didn't even bother to pull those off. They just drove off. And she was there with her little sister and two parents and didn't remember it either. I'm like, what happened? Did you see it go away? She's like, no, I didn't see it go away. We watched everyone leave, but that's the last thing she remembered. It was about 3 or 4 years later, they were listening to the radio, and a guy called in to report his UFO sighting. He's like, yeah, I was at the Paramount Drive-In. This movie was on, and this UFO showed up. It was right at the right of the screen. And Claudia turned to her mom and was like, oh, my God, Mom, do you remember that? We were there. And her mom's like, yeah, I do remember that. Why did we not talk about this? It's weird. I wonder if some of these are, mass onboard experiences. But so many cases Most of them are what we would call a simple sighting. But this is what's really interesting, because I was studying them. I'm like, why are they doing this? I think they're just kind of showing themselves, kind of like a publicity campaign, letting us know that they're real. But I thought to myself, you could probably categorize each one of these as a CE5, a close encounter of the fifth kind, right? Because we're using lights to basically call them down. And
Yeah.
you look driving theater from above, you can see it way the heck out there in outer space. It makes a very prominent, visible footprint. So, yeah, that's a really interesting category of cases that got zero attention. I barely stumbled on it when I was writing UFOs over Colorado, and I found 3 cases in a row. And that's when I thought, I wonder if this is a thing. And I hit pay dirt when I started going through the UFO news clipping service and found like 30, 40 cases in just that. So that was a year-long research project, at least.
What about, I thought this one was a good topic. When astronomers see UFOs, it says there's a dangerous misconception that only uneducated and uninformed people see UFOs. Nothing can be further from the truth. UFOs are seen by all kinds of people, including astronomers. In fact, many astronomers have seen UFOs.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it when I saw someone come on Facebook and said, if UFOs are real, how come astronomers haven't seen any? And I just about lost my mind. And that's when I decided, you know what? It's time to let people know that this is a thing. It's really interesting. Jacques Vallée is, of course, an astronomer. This is kind of how he got involved in this field. He was at an observatory when he saw astronomers deleting data, censoring data out. And he's like, what are you doing? Like, well, this doesn't match. No, we don't talk about this. And it absolutely floored him. J. Allen Hynek also did a survey with a bunch of astronomers and found out that they said, if I ever saw one, I wouldn't even talk about it.
Preston, wasn't it true that the government had their own term? I think Daryl Sims told me this, that the government had their own term for UFOs and they called them fast walkers. Is that right?
Yeah, I think they tried to use these different terms to sort of fly under the radar. And the terminology in this field is kind of a joke from day one. And look at the term UFO. That could be just about anything. And it's become synonymous with ET craft, really. Now they're calling them UAPs, but they call them UAOs. All kinds of terminology, which I think is a way to just talk about them without people knowing what they are, to basically cause a distraction. But many really prominent astronomers have seen UFOs. Clyde Tombaugh, the guy who discovered Pluto, had a very close-up sighting with his family of a solid UFO, even had little portholes on it. Probably my favorite astronomer who saw a UFO was Frank Halstead. In November, he was the head of Darling Observatory, and he was with his wife in 1954 on a train going through Death Valley when his wife looked out the window and said, honey, what's that? And there was this massive cigar-shaped craft pacing the train, kind of going over the mountains and following them. And right next to it was a much smaller, saucer-shaped, bright silver, chrome-like, mirror-like craft, moving in ways that obviously a balloon and a plane and a helicopter and so forth cannot do. He became a really prominent advocate and just got so much pushback from other astronomers. And it's amazing to me because there are so many astronomers who have seen UFOs. There's a list of about 300. Now that does include amateur astronomers, but really well-known astronomers who've seen UFOs. There was one guy, I forget his first name, Shaldak. He saw a UFO at White Sands. And there was another witness a couple of miles away who saw it. So they were able to triangulate it, know its speed, its size, and so forth. And they wrote up to Blue Book and said, we saw something. We know it's not a meteor. We're professional astronomers. We're trained observers. Well, Blue Book didn't do an investigation. They wrote it up and said, probably a meteor. So can you imagine contradicting a professional astronomer and not even doing an investigation? Project Blue Book is such a joke. So yeah, lots of astronomers have seen UFOs. Lincoln LaPaz.
Was Project Blue Book more a government program? And what do you think Hynek's, for those of you that don't know, J. Allen Hynek was in charge of Project Blue Book, and they've made a series about it on TV and everything. But do you think, they said at the end, Hynek kind of changed the way he felt, and he kind of embraced the phenomenon, but do you think he was always kind of against it? Or what do you, personally?
Yeah, he started out not a friend of ufology by any means. And we're going way back to the 1940s, where when he was hired by Project Blue Book as an astronomical consultant and towed the party line for 20 years. And basically said, no, what you guys are all seeing is Venus, and it's a balloon, and it's, a plane under unusual conditions. It's ball lightning. But he started to get jaded when he realized that Project Blue Book officers, the intelligence officers, were spending an enormous amount of attention on prosaic cases, on ones with obvious conventional explanations. And whenever they got a really good case, they would either ignore it or attack the witness. For example, there was this guy, Private Long, I think was his name. I forget his first name, but his last name was Long. And he was driving through Nevada and came upon 3 landed discs, perfect flying saucers, and actually got out of his car and started to walk up to them. When they, 1, 2, 3, lifted up, took off, and darted away at super high speeds. It's a really good case. He reported to Project Blue Book. He had just finished flight training school. He was a really good observer, and they attacked him. They said, we need to check into his psychological stability. That was their goal. J. Allen Hynek pointed out that case in particular as being one of the cases that really raised his eyebrows. And the Lubbock Lights, remember that case?
Yeah, also, I wanted to point out, I just wanted to point this out, that someone left this comment on your channel. I wanted to see if you agreed with this, because it's a prominent case, the Lonnie Zamora case. Someone wrote, Sean Drew 7837 says, Zamora case swayed J. Allen Hynek. He means JH, guys. Yeah. Do you believe that? Do you believe the Lonnie Zamora case had a prominent effect on J. Allen Hynek?
It did. Yeah, absolutely. And he started looking at more of these cases, because that was another one that it was one of the very, very few cases that involved a humanoid that the Air Force was unable to explain away. But nevertheless, they did not want to give it any publicity. Really, the turning point came at the Hillsdale College sighting in 1966, March of 1966, when a UFO showed up over Hillsdale College and was seen by 80 students, faculty, even police officers saw it. It stayed there for 2 hours. It actually landed in the swamps by the school, and finally it took off. Well, he was called to the case by Project Blue Book, and he's like, there could be various explanations for this. We're not sure what it is. I'm going to do an investigation. For all we know, it might be swamp gas. Well, nobody liked that. And he was viciously attacked in the press and by the witnesses. And in fact, that was the low point of his career, he said. That's what caused him to leave Project Blue Book, become an independent UFO researcher. Project Blue Book closed the year after that, pretty much. This has also led to a congressional hearing, thanks to Representative Ford, who became president. That was a big deal. It was a real turning point in this whole subject, because it led to one of the first congressional hearings on this, well, the first congressional hearing on this subject. And it's interestingly a schoolyard case, because it was 2 weeks after that Westall High School in Melbourne, Australia had their encounter. It's Australia's most widely viewed encounter. And it was funny because Jim and Coral Lorenzen said, you know what, we keep getting cases of UFOs over schools. Here's another one. We think this is going to happen again. We think the ETs are doing this on purpose. Ray Fowler was also investigating in that area And he's like, I found 16 cases that I think are unexplained this year. This is March, mind you, not that deep into the year. He's got 16 cases. 8 of them, half, were over schools. So that is how far back this UFOs over schoolyard thing goes. Researchers.
You know what? Speaking of, yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, I want to ask you. Did you see the other day? James Fox did a press conference on the Virginia case. Like, it was specifically for that Virginia case, which I thought was pretty compelling. You know, I've been kind of. I haven't been the most supportive of the UFO hearings, you know, because I feel like we don't get a lot from them. But like at the same time, I also feel like they are positive in a way that they are trying to bring disclosure. And I haven't talked to you about this yet, Preston. And you would be the best person to get their opinion on what's going on with the UFO hearings, because you've been a big part of ufology for a long time. You know, you've been writing in articles and books for years. So like, you know, like, what do you think of the current hearings? And do you think they hold promise?
I don't. I think there are some good things about them for sure, because for decades and decades and decades, officialdom, you know, refused to touch this subject with a 10-foot pole. Nobody in Congress, not a president, nobody would say a darn word about this. No hearings, nothing. It was just crickets. And that started to change in, I think it was 2016, when we had a congressional hearing and the New York Times article came out and people started to take an interest in this subject. And now we've got all these hearings, one after another. They've been going pretty regularly. And it's very encouraging in some ways. It was amazing to hear senators saying, we think there's a cover-up. The Pentagon is not cooperating with us. Some of us have seen UFOs. And the senator, I remember him saying this specifically, but I'm not going to name them. Well, that made me mad. Name them. You know, come forward. Witnesses have the courage to come forward. You should too. If you really want to fight this cover-up, you have to be truthful and transparent. Don't say you're not going to name names. Name names. So it's frustrating. And I love that whistleblowers are telling their story, but it's clear to me that some of these are what I would call bad actors. They are towing the party line. I don't know that they're entirely truthful. I think some are truthful, but have been muzzled, or to some extent are only able to talk about to a certain extent, or even worse, are being forced to basically toe the party line and say what the government wants them to say. I think an honest to God whistleblower who contradicts the government narrative would be, you know, taken care of, so to speak, ground to the, you know, done away with is what I'm trying to say. So yeah. This is a very tricky time right now. I love that people are talking about this subject seriously. That's awesome. But it's a dog and pony show. They're not telling the truth. When asked about Roswell, they said, we don't know about it. We've got nothing on it. The heads of defense, Moultrie and Daley, were asked about the Malmstrom incident, which we all know about. 1967, UFOs came over this missile base and shut these missiles down. They said, we have no reporting on that. A senator asked them directly, have we ever shot at UFOs? They very quickly, both of them said, oh, no. We've never done that. What a lie. I almost turned off the TV right then and there. It's insane. Yes, we have. Look at the Battle of LA. We shot 1,300 rounds. I think it was 14 around there of ammunition at this giant object over Culver City in 1944, 43, thereabout. And of course, throughout 1950s, we were shooting at these objects from our jet planes until and unless our intelligence agencies, our military, the Pentagon, these are the folks behind the cover-up, until they admit to the truth of the Capitol flyover in 1952, the Edwards Air Force Base landing in 1954, the Malmstrom incident, any number of very high-profile, Roswell, 1947. Admit to the truth of that, and then we'll listen. Until then, I don't think we should listen to them. I think the cover-up is still firmly in place. They're showing us these tiny little shadow dots of UFO footage. And I know for a fact that they have absolute, pristine, 100% conclusive footage of UFOs, because those jet fighters have cameras all around them, gun cameras, every side, top, bottom, front, back. And there's case after case after case after case of these jet fighters seeing UFOs close up. Show us that gun camera footage. They're not doing it. They're not doing it. So I don't trust them. Their history on this is heinous. So no, I think it's a little bit of just towing us, leading us by our nose down this pathway, this narrative. I think that's exactly what's going on. They have to take steps towards disclosure to remain relevant or credible, because if they don't talk about UFOs, no one's going to believe them. And that's already where we're at. They've dug their own grave, and I have little pity for them. I am sorry. I'm all for, quote, catastrophic disclosure. Let the chips fall where they may. I don't care if it has an effect on religion and politics and business and so forth, because not telling the truth is a far worse path for everyone involved. That's my assessment on the disclosure situation right now.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah. And but one thing I wanted to touch on was some of the things you mentioned before the show, to get back into some of these contact cases. Like, you mentioned UFOs in graveyards was a thing. Like, what did they frequently show up over graveyards?
Yes, it's crazy. I started looking into this because I read this case from J. Allen Hynek involving a young couple who decided to take a drive through the newly fallen snow and came upon the local graveyard. This is, Pennsylvania, I think it was. Massachusetts, that's right. And 1960s, thereabouts. And saw this big cloud of fog or mist or smoke or something over the graveyard, and it was brightly lit up. So like, what the heck is that? And they drove up to it and stopped, and he got out of the car and he saw this UFO. She saw it too, this metallic object glinting. And he raised his hand to wave when he became unable to move, and his arm slammed into the hood of his car pretty forcefully, at which point the object lifted up and took off. And he was able to move again, and they got back in the car and darted off. I thought, gosh, isn't that interesting? Because Jim and Coral Lorenzen had a case that was also very bizarre, where this lady owned a funeral home, and one guy was visiting the grave, the grave site, came running in and said, "There's a UFO outside." Well, the owner of the funeral home said, whatever, didn't really believe him, and didn't make much of it until a couple of days later. I think it was her son came running in like, "Mom, there's a UFO outside." So I started looking into these cases, and I found like 20 or 30 of them. There was one in France where these kids were roller skating by a graveyard, and they saw this UFO, and then they saw this little guy inside running through the gravestones, swerving around and getting into the UFO, and it took off. Found a number of cases involving humanoids, involving landings. There was a case in Canada where a UFO came down, and the next day they inspected the area and found that there were markings, burn marks, alongside between the graves. There's a case, probably the ultimate of all of these, because there's a lot of them, is in West Virginia at the Dean Memorial Cemetery and the Nethkin Cemetery. They're adjoining cemeteries, where it was happening so often. People would go out there on UFO stakeouts, and they started to notice this pattern that whenever there was a newly dug grave, someone newly put in, this is when the UFOs would show up. So yes, this is a thing. Raymond Fowler has a number of cases. It's funny, he was staking out a graveyard because he had heard a report of UFOs over that area. And he got busted by the police. The police came up and said, "What are you doing in here?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, we're staking out, we've heard that there is UFO activity in this area." And they said, "Oh, well, that's interesting because we just had a case of a grave robber where someone disturbed a grave." So I don't know exactly what's going on here. My first theory, just speculating, was that they were collecting genetics from people because our genes will survive. But Scott Corrales also noticed. He's another researcher who I really respect. He noticed this pattern. He wrote an article for Fate magazine at the same time I did. We both sent it in, and he beat me to publication. I ended up publishing my article in the MUFON Journal. But he said, probably they're collecting implants. And I asked Dolly Saffron about that. And she's like, yeah, that's probably one of the reasons. That, and some of these people are their own, meaning, they're hybrids. So they would be essentially doing their own sort of, whatever you want to call it, reclamation and taking the body and disposing it in the way that they do it. So it's definitely a thing. It's very bizarre. And there are enough cases that absolutely we know that this is a UFO attractor, is how I would put it. It's a great place to do CE5s, perhaps. I don't know.
What I wanted to do is I wanted to open up the phone line. I have the phone lines open, guys. So I would do like serious calls if we can. I do call in. So if you want to call in and ask Preston a question about UFOs, if you have a serious question, it's 573-877-7637, or you can call outside the U.S. It's 0111-573-877-7637. If you want to tell about your UFO encounter, if you've had a UFO encounter, if you've had something weird happen, call in. It's kind of like old school Art Bell style where you can call in and, and I'll put you on the air and if we don't get any calls, that's fine. But, I always like it when we get a few calls because it makes the show fun. And, and so I just decided I'd announce that the lines are open if anybody wants to call in. What about Preston when aliens show up at UFO conferences? This is a big thing, right? This is like something that's happened time and time again.
Yeah, which really surprised me, but in a weird way, it kind of makes sense because UFO conferences are basically frequented by people who are not only very interested in the subject, but I'm guessing more than half the people who go to these conferences, not more, have had experiences. It's why they're interested in this subject. So it's essentially a gathering of contactees. And what better place to, have a UFO encounter? First time I really got any awareness of this, I was at the Triad conference in Coronado Island in March of 1994. And there was a huge encounter on the day before the conference, which ended up being, I wrote a whole book about it. So did Yvonne Smith. Her book is amazing on this subject. The Coronado encounter, I called mine the Coronado incident, or she called hers Coronado. At any rate, definitely I'd recommend her book or mine. At any rate, there was like 6 people I interviewed, Mike Evans, his wife, 2 other groups of people who were all in the Village Inn on that night, and all of them were taken. This wasn't at the conference itself, but kind of, I'm like, this is really interesting. And I started looking into it after I heard about another case where I was again at this conference. This was in, this was the MUFON conference in Irvine in 2013, thereabouts. Don't quote me on that. I think maybe it's 2016. At any rate, I was speaking there. So was Linda Zimmerman and Stanton Friedman and a bunch of other people. It was a great conference, and I didn't think much of it. But I later found out that 2 people claimed that UFOs showed up during the conference. One guy, Michael Knox, he's done the lecture circuit, He's a really good witness. He's a military guy. He was a trained observer. He was suffering from a torn Achilles tendon at the time he was attending this conference, and says ETs came into his room and healed him of his Achilles tendon. He had a roommate who saw the grays. He didn't see them, but he sure noticed when he woke up and found out that, he no longer had a torn Achilles tendon.
Wow.
Be with him, recalled being taken on board and seeing a bunch of the presenters, the people who were speaking, on board the craft. It's funny because I woke up that morning feeling really unwell and a little off. And I always wondered about that because I was fine the day before. She didn't say specifically who was on board there, and I certainly have no memory of it. But there was another person who said that they were outside. And these were reported to NUFORC, National UFO Reporting Center. And they saw these giant orbs moving around over the hotel. This is in Irvine. So I started looking more deeply into this, and there was a bunch of cases. UFOs apparently showed up at the Giant Rock Conference in 1959. There was a guy who wrote a book called Blue Beings at the Alien Conference. And this was in Portland, Maine, the 4th Annual Experiencers Conference. Gosh, I forget the guy's name. It's an interesting book. I talked to a couple of the people who were there. One lady, she's like, yeah, I think I saw who they were talking about, and they did look unusual. I'm not sure that they were actually ET. But another said, oh, yeah, this person was not human. Was described as being very tall and slender and bluish skin, and just walked right in through the conference. Because some of these guys, I think, do walk among us. There was in the Joshua Tree, the contact in the desert, UFOs showed up in 2016, and hundreds of people saw them. Melinda Leslie was there, some other very prominent people within the UFO community. And these were objects that were coming in pairs or singly or even more, and zipping across the sky and stopping and doing all these maneuvers. They were caught on film. They were photographed. This was an absolute display. And I found a few others. There was reportedly a really crazy incident in 1979 when General Uchoa in Rio de Janeiro was speaking. He's a very prominent Brazilian researcher. And apparently these little tiny humanoids showed up and wreaked havoc in the audience and disappeared. I only found a tiny little blurb on that, and the more I just couldn't find confirmation enough to really, convince me that this was a true incident. But I found something on it, and yeah, I would love to. I've heard a few more cases since then, so this might be a thing. One lady, she was contacted in her hotel room at a conference and was taken on board. So, yeah, it makes a weird kind of sense because there's a lot of contactees there.
Wow, that's amazing. We had a caller. If you want to try to call back in, go ahead, caller. I missed you, so there. But I didn't want to interrupt you. Okay. Let me see. Let me see here. Let me see. I'll see if I can just call back. I'll call back. I'll see if it works.
All right. Well, I see a question.
Here's a call in queue. Here we go. Hello, you're live on the air with Preston Dennett and Typical Skeptic Podcast.
G'day, my name's Mark. I'm calling from Australia. Thanks for having me on, guys. My question for you, Preston, is the onboard encounters, the people who get shown the technology, like the engines of the craft and so on. You've talked about it in your books and on some of your shows. Is there any more follow-up? I've asked you this question before. I've commented on the videos. Can you give us any more details? Do you still talk to those people?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for calling. I'm going to let him answer you now. And that was a great call. Yeah. Were you able to hear him, Preston?
Yeah. It's about people who are taken into the engine room, or what we would call the engine room of a UFO, and shown how ETs power these craft, and sometimes explained about it. I haven't had the opportunity to speak to many people about this. Dolly Safran definitely has been told quite a bit about this. She's really the only person I'm able to follow up real closely with. I do know that Yvonne Smith interviewed twins, by the way. Forgot about those twins. Jesse Long and John Long. And John, he's got a high school education, but following his encounters, became incredibly interested in quantum physics and energy-free motors, and ended up filing patents for this because he started just doing his research and realized, oh my gosh, I think I could figure this out. And he filed this patent, and guess what? The military showed up, the NSA, I think it was, and said, we're very interested in this patent. We might ask you to withdraw this patent. And in fact, anyone you've told about this, we want to know about. And so it became kind of a big deal. He ended up splitting this invention into two pieces so he could file a patent on one part of it and a patent on the other, which was sort of a back door to getting this information out there. But there's quite a few cases of this, of people filing patents for energy-free motors and this type of thing. One guy I did follow up on. I interviewed him. He had an encounter on a Navy ship, and he was an electronics engineer, I believe, and had this encounter where he was on, someone called him onto the deck, like, there's UFOs up there. So he went up there with about 10 other guys and saw these basically USOs off on the horizon, quite some distance away, and they're pulsating and getting smaller and larger. So he went down below and called the bridge. He said, there's UFOs there. And they're like, no, what are you talking about? We don't see anything, which was ridiculous because it was super obvious. He went back up and watched them again. He bought a pair of binoculars at port, right, earlier. So he broke into his locker, opened up the box, pulled out his binoculars, and ran up there and looked at them through binoculars. Couldn't see much more detail. These were just lights. This is a long story, so I'll shorten it. Went back below deck and called him again and said, those UFOs are still there. And the guy said, we're damn busy. We can't talk now. He identified who it was that he spoke with. Finally, the ship turned and the UFOs disappeared. And the next day, he called up the bridge and they said, we know nothing about it. And he asked for the officer that he had spoken to. Well, that guy had been picked up by helicopter and taken away. They said for, quote, shore leave, which is ridiculous. That does not happen. No one's picked up by a helicopter for shore leave. It doesn't happen. Wow. It did not get into logbooks. So he approaches his buddies who he saw up there. There was 10 of them. None of them remembered this. They're like, what are you talking about? You're crazy. He finally found one. He's like, oh yeah, I do remember that. I almost forgot. But that night, he had this, quote, dream that he was taken on board. He does not think it's a dream. It's incredibly detailed, where he was shown a free energy device. And these human-looking ETs said, you have the knowledge to make one of these. Because often people are contacted and they don't have an education. Well, he did. And that was his story. They talked to him for an hour about the evolution of energy on our planet, from horse-drawn cart to coal to gasoline to rocket engines to nuclear power and wind and solar and all of this. And they said there are other sources of energy you are not looking into or you're not aware of. You really need to shift away from fossil fuels. It's not good for your planet and so forth. So they explained to him how to do this. And he never touched it for years and years. He, was honorably discharged, weirdly became a water dowser. That's what he did. Very successful, by the way, and got awards and became very famous for it. And finally, his family, he told his family much later about this encounter. I'm like, you should try it, build it. And he went to the hardware store. He said all he needed was magnets and a bicycle wheel and a few other things. and he built this sort of perpetual motion device. And he said, people would just laugh at me if they saw this, but this thing turned, you pushed it once, and it turned for about 3 weeks to a month with just one.
Shit.
And I tried to get him to do more follow-up on that. I talked to him about 2 years ago and had interviewed him quite a bit of time before that. His story is in my book, Inside UFOs. And he just was too embarrassed. He's like, no, I don't want to talk about it. I'm like, this is really cool. This is interesting. Tell me more. And he's like, no, I ended up, packing it up and putting it away. I don't know where it is anymore. And so he was kind of not really wanting to talk about it for some reason.
Wow.
But I keep running into this. There's case after case of this. There was a guy in California who had this exact thing happen. He filed patents too. I did an episode of this on my YouTube channel, and I posted the patents. You can look them up. They're absolutely real patents. But I would love to do more research on that and write a whole book on just that.
Well, we got one more caller. Let's see who this is. Hello, you're live on the air with UFO researcher Preston Dennett and Typical Skeptic Podcast. Who's calling, please?
Hey, how are you? This is Andrew.
Hi, Andrew. Nice to meet you. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, during CE5, is it okay to use meditation music, or is it better to just do it in silence?
Okay, I'll let Preston answer your question, and thank you for calling. So that was about CE5, Preston. If you heard him, he says, is it better to do meditation or better to do it in silence or music? I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I'd say whatever works for you. If you are able to reach a deeper meditative state using music, I think that's a great idea. I'd be careful what music you use. Not playing rock and roll and loud rap or anything like this. Classical music, perhaps, or softer music, which brings you into a meditative state. Because music can be very effective to help bring your consciousness out of what are the states of consciousness, theta, delta, all of those. You want to get to delta state, I guess, towards sleep. And that allows you to have a psychic connection much more profoundly. So yeah, I think really it wouldn't matter all that much, but consciousness is actually the key to it. It's not really so much lights or, playing beeping tones or anything like that. It's all about reaching out telepathically to the ETs and trying to make a connection that way.
Wow, I love that. And do you, like, going off of Dolly Saffron's testimony, are they still here? Or are they on the outer systems, or they're just not touching down on Earth, or like what's going on with that now, Preston? Like, what are they back, or like because It seems like we don't have as many cases on it anymore.
Yeah, when Dolly told me that, I'm like, wait, what? Because that's shocking news to me. This is around 2022 that they took off, she says. I'm like, well, why? Why would they do that? And she says, well, basically what it comes down to is that our magnetic fields around our planet have collapsed by 40%. And it's going up. You can do the science on this. Go look it up. Go to Space Weather Observers, I think it's called, with Ben Davidson. He's really the go-to guy on this. But that's apparently why. And when she said that, I'm like, wow, well, that's kind of interesting, because I'd heard from a few contactees, like, I'm not having contact anymore. And now I'm paying very close attention to this because, I do know a number of contactees, and some would have regular contact. There's a guy in England. He's like Dolly, a fully conscious contactee, not having onboard encounters. And I've talked to some other contactees who basically said that. And I looked up statistics at places like MUFON. People certainly are seeing stuff, but I'm not getting onboard encounters. That's not to say people can't still have a psychic connection, or that ETs might even appear as what you would perhaps better term an apparition or a remote viewing type of thing, where it might look real. I mean, people are still absolutely in connection with ET. But yeah.
Would it be more like an astral thing now, Preston? Do you think like in a almost like like an astral experience, maybe?
For them, not. I mean, certainly people can contact ETs astrally. I'm very careful when I talk about this because people say, "Oh, well, UFO onboard experiences are astral." Generally speaking, no, they're physical events. It certainly is possible to go visit them astrally. I've done that once. But yeah, ETs can do that. They're very good at it. They're very, very psychically advanced. Their technology is essentially psychically driven. This is how, when people fly the craft, Dolly talks about this, but Grant Cameron wrote a whole book on it, Sky Pilots. Really cool book. Every single person who reports this, it's done psychically. So yeah, they absolutely can do this.
We got oh, sorry. I was going to say we got another. I'm sorry. You got another question from the chat here. This is a good one, Preston. He says, "This is from Sovereign Cosmic Wildman." And he says, "Would he be willing to compile a list of beach encounters in Southern California?" He says, "I know he's covered a couple in Malibu and Carpinteria."
Yeah, I mean, I kind of already did. I wrote a book about USOs, undersea UFO base, which basically is exactly that. All the cases of USOs right off the Catalina coast. I think that might be a fun research project, though, because I'm sure there are ones that are all over the world. But yeah, I've already done that pretty much for Southern California. USOs are a pretty interesting subject. They haven't gotten a lot of attention, but that's absolutely another thing. It doesn't really surprise me. Population centers are clustered around bodies of water, rivers, lakes, reservoirs, and of course, oceans and shorelines. So you would fully expect to see a lot of UFOs or quote USOs there. But yeah, here's a question from Woo Writers DG. He says, can Preston speak on his thoughts on reptilians? He doesn't touch much on them. What are these beings and where are they from? Yeah, I don't get a whole lot of reptilian reports, Woo Writers. I've gotten a few, but not a whole lot. And I think one of the reasons is I'm not sure they're directly connected to UFOs. I think they're probably better termed crypto-terrestrials. I talked to a lady in Florida. That's what she was basically told. Dolly was told that she saw a reptilian. I've gotten very few of these cases. I think that they probably did survive, the Ice Age or whatever you want to, the extinction event that eliminated the dinosaurs, and they went underground. I do believe they're intelligent, and I think they probably went underground because I've heard of a number of cases where UFOs aren't necessarily involved, but a few where they have been. I don't know. It's hard for me to talk about them because I don't get a lot of cases.
Yeah, that's this has been fascinating, Preston. I know you're a busy guy, so I won't keep you any longer. I mean, yeah, do you want to tell people how they can get the new book and stuff? And thank you for doing this. This was awesome. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, you're welcome. The book is really cool. I did a whole section on alien books, people who've been taken on board and saw ET books. That's very cool. That we didn't get to talk about that. And of course, the twin connection. I did a whole one on alien names, warnings that people have been given. You can find the book at my website, prestondennett.weebly.com. I've covered some of these topics on my YouTube channel. Also, I'm on Facebook and other social media platforms. You can get the books on Amazon, if I didn't already mention that, or Barnes & Noble and so forth. But I really appreciate you having me on, Robert. I love these subjects. I think they're terribly important and super interesting. And I think it's time that this stupid cover-up just ends already. It's ridiculous.
I agree. And thank you so much, Preston. And guys, support the authors, support the guests that come on the show. Whether you're watching on Preston's channel or my channel, Preston puts a lot of work. He's put a lot of work into ufology, and he's one of the best researchers out there for real. He really is. And when you get one of his books, you're going to get real disclosure. You're going to get real cases, of people that have had encounters with ETs. So if you're looking for disclosure, look no further, because Preston's the guy to go to. Yeah. And and thank you, Preston. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in tonight. And thank you to anybody who called in. And good night, everybody.